I want to acknowledge what I said at the beginning of services, right? I know that coming to shul on Shabbat, coming together for services, um, that I definitely want to be treading the territory between needing to escape from whatever else is going on in the world around us and whatever stressors or anxieties we might be carrying with us, but also striving to make sense of what is going on in the world around us. And really trying to find where that line is and hoping that we can all find it together. And the other thing that I'm really finding this morning is just I shouldn't be anymore at this point, but I'm always so surprised by how we can find ways to relate these texts that we read every year, no matter the year, no matter the portion, no matter the portion of the portion, how we can always find something that feels really present, and really there and really resonant. And a lot of the times that's actually some of the most kind of challenging and fun part of diving into the Torah reading together. And hopefully it's also one of the most meaningful parts, and can be fun and eye-opening for all of us. Last year when we read Parshat Vayeira, I was actually not with you all, in what certainly felt like a different world and a different time. Mac and I were in Madison celebrating my nephew's bar mitzvah. He read the stories we read this morning, and as a 13-year-old young adult, which feels weird to say, I wanted to say a 13-year-old kid, he read these stories and found lessons that related to him of righteousness and justice, lessons that he was able to make more meaningful for himself by comparing them to the central characters in the Stephen King novel It, which is one of his favorite books, and that he took to heart more personally in trying to be inclusive in his recess basketball games. And so I want to take the opportunity this morning to share what feels particularly relevant to me. And while I'm guessing many of you may be in the same place, I know that not everyone is. And I also just want to make the caveat that I'm going to make an exception to my usual rule of I usually try to talk about specifically what we read this morning. Today I'm talking about the Parsha as a whole, and a little bit more specifically about the very beginning of Parshat Vayeira. This week, when we start Parshat Vayeira, we come upon Abraham as he is sitting in the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. He's waiting. We don't see any definite direction or clarity for him. Last week's Parsha ended with Abraham being promised by God what is Abraham's deepest desire, that his wife Sarah would give birth to a child. Yet it doesn't happen right away. We pick Abraham's story back up after his circumcision. He's sitting out in the sun. He just got the biggest news of his life, or possibly the biggest news of his life. He's had a very exciting life. That at age 99, and with his wife, 89 years old, they would have a child. And yet the thing that happens next, his next step, is sitting in the sun. At this point, I would expect Abraham's brain to be racked by anxiety and anticipation. I imagine some scenario where, in his own way, he's kind of continually hitting refresh, waiting for his and Sarah's story to develop. Will this happen? If so, when? If so, how? But Abraham's story is not a story of passivity or inaction. Instead, Abraham completely throws himself into what is important, into his own version of Tikkun Olam and growing closer to God. He gets up from the entrance to his tent. He welcomes guests into his home. He sets out to save the town of Sodom. And when he cannot accomplish that, he moves on with his life. He does everything he can to do what he thinks is right. Would anyone have blamed Abraham if he just said, I just got this mind-blowing news. I'm waiting for reality to catch up. I'm going to shut myself in my tent for a few months? Of course not. But Abraham, being Abraham, he doesn't let the lack of clarity around him paralyze him. He uses it to spur himself into action, to try to build the world he wants to see for the children he wants to have. There's a great call to action that can be gleaned from not knowing. Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, the president of Hebrew College, shared a midrashic teaching this week that exemplifies this idea and that I want to share with you. It comes from a verse in Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, that reads, Et hakol asa yafeh vayito, et ha'olam natan b'libam, mibli asher lo yimtza adam, et ha'maaseh asher asa Elohim, merosh ve'ad sof. God brings everything to pass precisely at its time. God also puts eternity in their mind, but without man ever guessing from first to last all the things that God brings to pass. The Midrash points out that the Hebrew word for eternity is spelled the same as the word for hidden, that there is something hidden in the hearts of all humanity. Namely, as they continue to explain, humanity never knows when death approaches. Were we to know when we would die, according to the Midrash, the temptation to stop moving forward would be too great. Why continue to build and to plant if we knew we wouldn't reap the benefits? The drive to keep moving forward, to keep building and planting, comes from not knowing. And not only do we benefit from this, but so does everyone around us and future generations. I'm not sure how many of you read the email that I sent on Wednesday morning from beginning to end, which included a post-election prayer by Dr. Erica Brown. There was a line in there, I pray that every congregational rabbi in this country will give a sermon on Jewish unity this Shabbat. To which, of course, my dad picked up the phone and said, Alex, you're on the hook for this Saturday morning. So here goes. Here's the sermon on Jewish unity for this Shabbat. No matter what happens in the coming days and weeks, a lot will remain unknown. If we had better clarity in this moment, if there would have been a landslide one way or the other, of course, depending on our political leanings, we might have been content to sit back and to say, well, things are now going to get better. Or, well, things appear to be too hopeless to bother even trying to fix. We might have wound up completely taking ourselves out of the equation. Yet here we are, not knowing. And hopefully all of us, and certainly, hopefully all of us, meaning the world over, and certainly at least the Jewish community, can use that not knowing to focus in on what we really do know. That we need to join together, we need to push back against misinformation and conspiracy theories, against anti-Semitism, against racism and social injustice, and not just sit in the heat of the day feeling overwhelmed, but go out into the world and be the active agents for change for the world we want to see, both for ourselves, for our families, our friends, our loved ones. And embody that as fully as we can.